All right, let's talk about a name we all know, Sherlock Holmes. But what about the guy who actually created him, Arthur Conan Doyle? Well, it turns out their relationship was, let's just say, really complicated. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. Can you even picture it? A world with no 221B Baker Street, no loyal Dr. Watson, none of it? The entire detective genre we know and love today, it would look completely different. And here's the craziest part. It almost happened. The man who dreamed up Sherlock Holmes actually grew to resent him so much that he, and I'm not kidding, literally wrote him falling off a cliff. This is the story of that incredible creative battle. So to really get why this happened, we've got to pull back the curtain and meet the man himself. Because Arthur Conan Doyle was so much more than just the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes. And what's wild is just how much he wrote. I mean, look at this range. Doyle wasn't just churning out mysteries. He was writing these epic historical novels, stuff that's basically early science fiction. And he was a huge, passionate believer in spiritualism, especially after he lost his son in World War I. He saw himself as a serious literary author. And then, almost by accident, he created a character that would completely and totally overshadow everything else he would ever do. And check out how fast this happened. So, in 1887, A Study in Scarlet comes out, and we meet Holmes. 3 years later, we get The Sign of the Four. But it was the short stories in '92 that made him a global superstar. We're talking 5 years. In just 5 years, he went from being some new character to a total cultural icon. So, what was the secret sauce? It was how he solved crimes. This method of deduction was totally groundbreaking. It wasn't guesswork. It was pure, cold, hard logic. This is the guy who could tell you what you did for a living just by looking at the scuff on your shoe. And that idea, it created the template for pretty much every detective that came after him. Which is pretty ironic, right? A man who believed in spirits created the most logical character in history. But as Holmes got more and more famous, Doyle got more and more frustrated. He felt trapped by his own creation. So he decided there was only one way out. He had to end it. And that decision led to one of the most famous moments in all of literature. Now, if you're gonna kill a hero like Sherlock Holmes, you can't just have him slip on a banana peel. You need a villain who is his absolute equal. And that's where Professor Moriarty, the Napoleon of crime, comes in. He was just as brilliant as Holmes, the perfect arch-nemesis. For Doyle, it had to be Moriarty. So he did it. In the story, The Final Problem, Holmes and Moriarty struggle at the edge of the roaring Reichenbach Falls, and they both go over. They plunge to their deaths. And for Arthur Conan Doyle, that was it. Chapter closed. Sherlock Holmes was gone for good. Yeah, the public, they did not agree. People were completely heartbroken. I'm talking people on the streets of London wearing black armbands in mourning. The outcry for Holmes to come back was just massive and relentless. Doyle had no idea what he'd started. 8 years. For 8 whole years, Doyle refused to bring him back. He was focusing on his other work, the serious stuff he wanted to be known for. But that demand for Holmes never, ever went away. It was this constant reminder of the character he just couldn't escape. And finally, he gave in. He wrote a new story where it turns out Holmes had faked his own death to take down the rest of Moriarty's criminal network. The detective was back, and that comeback, well, it cemented his place in history. Not just as a character, but as a legend that would never die. But let's not let Sherlock steal the whole show, because we really need to talk about the other incredible worlds Doyle was busy creating, the stories he was actually most proud of. Just look at this. Even while Holmes was supposedly dead, Doyle wrote The Hound of the Baskervilles, an absolute classic of Gothic horror. Then he switches gears completely and writes The Lost World about finding living dinosaurs. And then he even turns Holmes into a spy during World War I. The guy's imagination was just boundless. And that brings us to another one of his awesome characters, Professor Challenger. This guy is this loud, adventurous, booming scientist who finds a plateau full of prehistoric creatures. He is the total opposite of the cool, calm, analytical Sherlock Holmes, which just goes to show you, Doyle was anything but a one-trick pony. So when we look back at all of it, what's the final takeaway? What is Arthur Conan Doyle's legacy? And what do we make of this whole complicated relationship he had with his most famous creation? Well, his impact it's everywhere. He didn't just write a few detective stories, he basically wrote the playbook for the entire genre. His way with plots and characters has inspired literally a century of movies, TV shows, you name it. He's an absolute giant of literature, no matter if he was writing about detectives, dinosaurs, or ghosts.
So think about it for a minute. Who's your favorite detective today? Maybe it's a superhero like Batman, or someone from a show like CSI, or a character in some thriller you just read.
You know, no matter who you just thought of, the odds are pretty high that they owe a little something to that brilliant, eccentric, and apparently unkillable detective from 221B Baker Street. And of course, to the creator who, try as he might, just couldn't keep him down.